Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Imprint Explained. And today we're looking at one of the topics of the latest current affairs, and that is the GDP growth rate for Q4 of 2020, that is Jan to March. And what has happened is something which is shocking. So, what happened that was we were expecting that the growth rate would decline. We had a bad year last year, right, economic wise, and PG Damram had forecasted that for Q4 it would be below 4%, and it had turned out to be worse, right, at 3.1. So now in this video we'll talk about what's the deceleration in GDP growth rate. What does it tell about state of economy, right? Because this was before COVID hit India, and right now I think we are even expecting somewhat of a minus number across the year, right? But so this tells us how fragile our economy is in some ways. So let's start. Let's go into details. So GDP growth slows down to 3.1% in Q4, and physical deficit has also widened to 4.6 nearly of GDP. Now, this is the first glimpse of the extent to which the COVID outbreak and subsequent lockdown could impact the economy. This tells us that the GDP or the economy, in some ways, was not that great even before. So, what? Just look at the data. So, GDP at constant 2011-12 prices in Q4 of 2019-20 is estimated to be 38 lakh crore, and this is against 36.9 that is in Q4. So the growth rate is 3 points. So how would you calculate it? So 38.04 minus 36.9 divided by 36.9, and this gives us 3.1%. Now this kind of tells you that this is extremely low. Okay, so this is how we'll calculate the GDP percentage wise. So the growth in GDP is estimated at 4.2, and this is an 11-year low. So it tells you somehow, we have reached the Hindu rate of growth, right? We're at 3%. This was supposedly what was bad about the Indira Gandhi era in some ways, or the 1960s and 70s. And we all talked about the fact what is wrong with socialism. And at that time, this was seen to be the growth rate seems to be the indicator, right? And that was a reason why privatization happened in India in some ways. Now, with privatization, with all the reforms, we still at 3%. This tells us how badly the economy has been handled. Now, what about the physical deficit? So, a lot of people would have heard the 20 lakh crore jumla, right, in which RBI's loan was shown as a stimulus package. Now, obviously, loans are not bad. They obviously will revive the economy and so on. But the government stimulus is not even 1%, and that was shown by various organizations, right? So, what is the reason for the government not giving any stimulus? And now we get to know the stimulus because the real reason. So the government revenue and expenditure, the gap between that, and that is known as the physical deficit, is widened to 4.6% of GDP in 2019. And in the budget, Nirmala Sitharaman was bragging about 3.8. Now this tells you how badly the economy has been managed, how badly they have done across the year. Because if you're looking at a physical deficit of 4.6, what's the point of having such a conservative government? They are maybe doing as physically badly as maybe any other government that ever existed in India. Now, uh, what other bad news do we have? So MoSPI released data fourth quarter, and obviously the provisional estimate also. So provisional estimate, the provisional figure which is likely to be revised again by January next year, when MoSPI releases the first revised estimate for 2020, states that the economy grew by 4.2% in 2019-20. This is the lowest annual growth rate of GDP registered right under the new series. Now, a lot of people have this debate about the new series. Personally, my opinion was that what they did was, in 2012-13 and 13-14. So they wanted to show, with the Modi government coming in, they wanted to show that the GDP is growing. So what they did, they tweaked the way we calculate GDP and showed obviously GDP was growing higher. And look at in 2016-17, the year of demonetization, we have 8.3%. That tells you that the way they're measuring GDP was changed. Now, what happens when you do this is that in the long run, these the changes catch up with you. So in the short run, obviously, you can show higher growth rate, but in time, you will realize that this goes badly for you. And this is what actually happened, right? It was not as if that in this time we were doing really well in 14 to 16, 17, 18, right? It's just that we were trying to look at data in a different viewpoint. And this is what in an analysis from our side is. Okay, though obviously anybody can disagree with us, but we do believe that this was the reason that the GDP was being shown as 8.3 or 8% in 15, 16 or 16, 17, right? So it is just the way statistics are measured in economics, I would say. So what is the real problem? What we expected, the government said we will have a 8.5% growth rate in July 2019 when the budget was presented, and but also significantly lower than 5% the advance estimates suggested at the end of February earlier this year. So we are even below what we thought was a bad year, right? 4 point something percent in India terms is a recession, right? Considering the kind of demographic dividend we have. And obviously, P. Chidambaram and I think Manmohan Singh would be saying that history will judge us better. It has already started to judge them better. What else has happened? So let's look at that. So nominal GDP has plummeted, right? So what is nominal GDP? In nominal GDP, I don't care about the inflation, right? If there's a higher inflation, I'll just add it up. So what it means is, let's say last year we had, let's say 100 cars, and there was having average price of, let's say 10 lakhs. So like 100 million cars were being sold for 10 lakhs. So we'll get, 1,000 lakh million. This was the, GDP of last year, let's say. Okay. So that would be the, okay. Now, this wouldn't, so if a similar number, 100, million cars are being sold this year as well. Now, if the price increases to, let's say 12 lakhs, the GDP anyhow artificially inflates despite the fact that, this is not happening. So the nominal GDP doesn't care about the fact that there is a price rise. Okay, so real GDP obviously is arrived at by subtracting the normal GDP by the inflation level. So at the time of 2019-20 budget, nominal GDP was to be 12 to 12.5%, and this is very normal for India. What happened was the provisional estimate pegs it only at 7.2. All right, and even in 18-19, the nominal GDP grew at 11%. This sharp deceleration tells us that the growth momentum of India had already gone before COVID-induced lockdown happened last week of March, right? That people, it was only the government spending that was supporting the GDP in some ways. It kind of tells you how badly managed our economy is, how badly the Modi government has done, how badly the BJP has somehow destroyed our economy in a matter of 6 years, I would say. But this is a way of maybe criticizing them. Let's try to give the benefit of doubt as well to them, right? So let's start talking about why this deceleration in nominal GDP matters. Now, the nominal GDP growth rate is the base of all physical calculation in the country. The government bases its calculation, say the amount of revenues it will raise and the amount of money it will be able to spend on this. And this is the real reason that the physical deficit has now increased so quickly. Now, there's a sharp divergence in the nominal GDP growth rate. It basically upsets all the calculation. A sharp fall means that the government does not get the revenue. And so the total receipts of the government was 17.5 lakh crore against an estimate of 19.31 lakh crore. What it means is that we suddenly have a physical deficit, okay, which we were expecting 3.8 as a physical deficit. Now it's 4.6. And this kind of pushes us into not spending enough. And in that, we basically see a contraction and it becomes a vicious cycle. So, and what else happens? It shows the government was not able to assess the magnitude of the economic growth deceleration that was underway. It also says, in some ways, that the decline in corporate tax rate, which was a once in a lifetime, once in a generation reform, did not help at all. Private investment fell by almost 3% in 2019-20, in contrast to a 9% increase in 18-19. This tells you that despite the fact we have a stable government, the stability has led to deceleration. It kind of tells us that the businessmen, don't trust this government at all. Um, People might criticize them for being a Surgut Sarkar. Now, provisional estimates brings out this weakness, and significant downward revisions also have happened in quarterly GDP estimates. Okay, so this is also a problem with this government, that what it does is there's a frequent revision in quarterly GDP. So India's national income accounting data, right, which is using 2011-12 as a base year, has come for a fair bit of criticism. Arvind Subramaniam, who was the chief economic advisor after he left the government, he said that the new series overestimated India's GDP as 2.5%. So what we were saying at 8% was actually something like 5.5. Okay, so while this debate has not been settled, the credibility of India's GDP estimate is not held by frequent and significant revisions that keeps on happening. So let's have a look what happens. So look at table 2, how the provisional estimates have fluctuated repeatedly. The growth estimate for Q2, that is July, August, and September, has gone up from right there. So there was 4.5, the first estimate. The second estimate pushes up to 5.1. It is as if they want to do some artificial hanky-panky stuff, right? And then it again goes back, right, to 4.4. Now, what the hell is happening? Is it just because the budget was happening that we want to show something like this, right? So there will be a lot of questions asked by various economists, and I think a lot of people have stopped trusting India's data, right? Today, if I'm a financial advisor to any big investment fund who wants to invest in India, I'll say, please measure the GDP on your own. Don't believe the government in some ways. Now, obviously, that is costly in some ways. They might or might not do that. So what is clear is that it is about becoming clear that India's growth rate was decelerating much faster than it was officially accepted. For instance, in July, which was the second quarter, the government insisted the full year GDP growth was 8.5%, despite the fact that there was economic deceleration. And this came out very quickly. So look at Indian manufacturing, which has been in negative territory in all quarters except the first. Right, Indian construction, right, the construction, right, again in negative territory, right. So it is only agriculture which is booming in some ways, right. So look at this, only agriculture is actually doing well in India in some ways, and obviously services. So warped economic structure. This tells us what has happened to India. What we wanted was to have we wanted jobs. We want good formal sector jobs, which could take away people who were less productive in agriculture and push them into some kind of manufacturing. Now, India was able to create well-paying jobs that allowed it to reap the so-called demographic dividend. So obviously, that would be great. But that didn't happen. Manufacturing is anyhow not doing well. And as you can see in the last 3 quarters, that tells you that we need to do something. Though the government obviously has done a lot of reforms, whether they will work in a time when there's a lockdown, where people are not really sure whether what they want to do. So it might not really work, the kind of reforms they're doing. But I would not say the government is not trying. The upshot obviously is that the deceleration since 2016-17 has simply become worse. And this is somehow seen to be the lowest low. And if you think about it, because of COVID, the government has an excuse. People will not care about 3.1 because it will even look good in the COVID year. In this year, it looks as if the economy will contract by 5 to 10%. Okay, and in what we have the repeated downward revisions that keeps on happening. Even this 3.1% or the 4.2 overall growth rate might be optimistic. So with that very sad news, I would like to end. And let's hope, by next year, again, things become normal and we can think of the 10% growth rate that we always have been targeting across the last 10 years. Thank you so much for listening. Do join our Telegram group for the PDF of the video. You can call us at 6280187919, or you can email us at imprintknowledgesolutions@gmail.com if you have any questions. Thank you so much for listening.